Fatima Grupo, who was a teacher at now-defunct Cardinal McCarrick High School in South Amboy, New Jersey, was arrested in July of 2015 after she repeatedly had intercourse with a male student. The investigation into Grupico's conduct began after school officials notified authorities about their concerns. It was later found out that the woman and the teen had been intimate on several occasions between May 4th and May 30th of 2014. Grupico was later put into the Middlesex County Jail on charges of sexual assault and child endangerment. On April 25, 2016, Grupico pleaded guilty to endangering the welfare of a child through intercourse. She was sentenced to 3 years probation, fined, and ordered to relinquish her teaching certificate. Number 11. Groper caught on live newscast. On September 12, 2023, Spanish television reporter Isa Balado was in the middle of a live broadcast from the streets of Madrid when a man walked up to her and touched her buttocks. The 30-year-old correspondent for Channel 4 had been reporting on a story about a botched robbery when a man came up behind her. After having assaulted her, he asked her which television station she worked for, to which Balado replied by telling him she was on a live broadcast and then tried to continue with the coverage. The show's host, Nacho Abad, who was in the studio but part of the broadcast, subsequently intervened. Abad asked Balado if she'd been inappropriately touched, to which she replied in the affirmative. The host urged the reporter to put the alleged groper on camera. Balado then confronted the man, but he denied touching her. When Balado insisted that he did touch her, he apologized and tried to shake her hand. She brushed him off and asked him to let her do her job. As he walked away, he attempted to ruffle Balado's hair, prompting the host in the studio to call him stupid. After the man continued lingering in the street and Balado described the situation as completely unpleasant, she said the man was bothering everyone he came across further down the street. Moments later, the man went back and approached her again, saying he'd heard her accusations and that she should tell the truth. At that point, the broadcast was cut and police were called. The 25-year-old suspect was later taken into custody on suspicion of assault but wasn't publicly identified. The broadcast was uploaded on YouTube and had nearly 50 million views as of December of 2023. Number 10. Sha Robinson. In the summer of 2021, 17-year-old English teen Sha Robinson beat a man senseless, then threatened to kill him if the woman who had been accompanying the man he had just beaten wouldn't have intercourse with him. The female victim, who was in her 20s, had been walking home from Sunderland city centre with the man she had just been on a first date with when they were targeted by Robinson without warning. Robinson kicked the man in the face and subjected him to a severe beating before leaving him unconscious and bleeding on the ground. After witnessing the horrific violence, the woman was threatened by Robinson. In a desperate bid to save the man's life, she submitted to what Robinson wanted. At that point, Robinson forced her into bushes where he made her lie on a coat before forcing himself upon her. He told her that if she stopped, he'd go and kill the man. The victim was crying throughout the ordeal and was told by Robinson, "Shut up and stop being a baby." After the attack, the woman managed to call her parents and police eventually caught Robinson near the scene. The attacker was sentenced to 5 years behind bars on January 24, 2023, after he admitted to the assault. He was also given an extended 3-year license period, put on the sex offenders register, and given a restraining order to protect his victims for life. Subsequent information indicated that Robinson's case was referred to the Attorney General under the unduly lenient sentencing scheme, a local law that calls for a second review of cases where a judge or other authority figure feels the punishment does not fit the crime. Number 9. Pio Yod Chorin. A cell phone video caught the moment a Thai man reached around a bus chair to try and fondle the breasts of 24-year-old Pinada China. On November 26, 2017, China was traveling on a public bus in Bangkok when she felt something on her chest. China told local media that it made her start to wonder if something was wrong with her chest. After it happened again, she decided to record it and pulled out her camera phone. China leaned forward and angled her camera where her waist had been. A few seconds into the recording, the footage showed fingers probing the area and trying to reach for her chest. At that point, she stood up and confronted the man, later identified as 36-year-old Pio Yod Chorin. China asked him why he touched her and added, "Are you a psycho?" To which Yod Chorin responded by denying having done anything. He then rushed out of the bus. Following the incident, the woman posted the footage online, prompting several other victims to come forward to say they'd been groped by the same man. Several of the women contacted police and a warrant for Yod Chorin's arrest was issued. On November 29th, Yod Chorin was finally brought in by police. He confessed to the assault caught on camera as well as several others. He claimed he couldn't keep his hands to himself after he'd spotted the victims. He ended up facing charges of committing indecent acts to persons over the age of 15 by force. Number 8. Joel Ramirez. 26-year-old Joel Ramirez was arrested for assaulting a 24-year-old woman at a Manhattan subway station and causing her injuries. The incident unfolded shortly before 3:30 a.m. on September 24, 2023. The victim was waiting for a northbound N train when Ramirez came up to her and grabbed her breast. As she tried to get away, the man shoved his hand down her pants and groped beneath her underwear. During the struggle, Ramirez forced her down onto the platform, repeatedly slamming her head to the ground and continued to grope her. Fortunately, a bystander stepped in and scared him off. The Good Samaritan helped the injured woman up the stairs and out onto the street before going to look for further assistance. While the woman was calling 911, she saw the suspect running back toward her, prompting her to flee. Ramirez caught up to her, snatched her phone and bolted. The woman ran after him for a ways, but ultimately hailed a taxi home. After realizing she had a bump on her head, a family member took her to Mount Sinai Morningside, where she underwent emergency surgery on her head. At some point, the incident was reported to law enforcement by an unspecified party. At around 10:30 p.m. the following night, Ramirez was arrested after police spotted him near the 59th Street Columbus Circle station and recognized him from a wanted flyer. He was booked into jail on charges of robbery, assault, abuse, forcible touching, and harassment. When officers checked his record, they found out that Ramirez had been arrested in February of the same year for a similar incident. Records also indicated that in July of the previous year, he was seen on a Brooklyn sidewalk, walking with no underwear, no shirt, and ripped shorts, all while speaking incoherently. Number 7. Leah Dipel. In late 2021, Leah Dipel perpetrated an online campaign to smear her former counselor's reputation, ultimately causing the victim's business to be destroyed in a matter of weeks. Court records indicated that the English woman from Alderley Edge had suffered from domestic violence and had dissociative personality disorder. She went to a domestic abuse hostel in Stockport, where Katie Coolin had worked as a counselor. When she moved out of that women's refuge in October of 2021, she reportedly became fixated on Coolin for some reason. Dipel, also known as Daisy Degnan, started harassing her, sending her hundreds of emails laced with profanities and topless photographs of herself. She also set up social media accounts wherein she claimed that Coolin's workplace was a nonce house and that the counselor was having trysts with everyone around. Dipel's campaign even went as far as hacking into the victim's business website and superimposing the counselor's pictures with male and female genitals before sending it to the woman's colleagues. These events resulted in Chorin becoming so traumatized that she left her job, transferred to another residence, and changed her identity. Dipel was eventually charged with stalking, causing serious alarm and distress, to which she pleaded guilty. In March of 2023, she was handed a 2-year prison sentence, suspended for 2 years, and a restraining order barring her from any kind of contact with the victim. Additionally, the 24-year-old was ordered to attend a mental health rehabilitation course. Number 6. Amanda Lee Quinones. On April 12, 2022, 30-year-old California woman Amanda Lee Quinones, a teacher and swimming coach at a high school in Eastvale, was arrested for committing lewd acts with a male student. Quinones had reportedly begun communicating with the teen in the fall of 2020. She started sending the student her nude photos, and the two eventually started having intimate meetings. Sheriff's detectives were alerted to the alleged acts by unnamed witnesses. Sufficient evidence was subsequently gathered to justify an arrest warrant, and Quinones was taken into custody without incident. She was booked into the Robert Presley Detention Center in Riverside and was released almost immediately after posting bail. Following the incident, the woman, who'd been a teacher at Eleanor Roosevelt High School since 2016, was placed on unpaid leave. At the end of a preliminary hearing on July 31, 2023, Riverside County Superior Court Judge Walter Kubelin found that there was sufficient evidence to warrant a trial on the lewd acts charge, as well as 3 counts of oral copulation of a child, 2 counts of distributing explicit material to a minor, and 1 count of annoying a child under 18 years old. Kubelin allowed Quinones to remain free on a $50,000 bond while she awaited trial. Number 5. Lorraine Massie. Englishwoman Lisa Alvarado filed a restraining order against a total stranger who'd launched a bizarre 3-month stalking campaign, following her around and calling her frequently without any explanation. 53-year-old Lorraine Massie from Earlham had somehow obtained Alvarado's phone number. She began making unsolicited calls to Alvarado on April 20th, 2022. Among other things, she told Alvarado that she needed to speak to her in person about a personal matter, despite the fact that both women weren't previously known to each other. Alvarado rejected the offer and started to ignore her subsequent attempts to communicate. Massie continued trying to reach her, not only by calling her but also by leaving her messages on WhatsApp and various other social media platforms. Over the next 3 months, she kept messaging Alvarado and made more than 100 calls. Whenever Alvarado picked up the phone, Massie would keep silent and sometimes hang up immediately. At some point, Alvarado even began noticing a familiar car parked outside her son's school whenever she'd pick him up. She later found out that it was Massie who was behind the wheel of that car, waiting for her to arrive. Consequently, the victim contacted law enforcement and reported Massie. When the suspect was arrested, she couldn't give an explanation for her fixation with the woman. Records indicated that she had no previous history of wrongdoing. During Massie's hearing at Wigan Magistrates Court, the defendant apologized to Alvarado, saying it wasn't her intention to cause any harm. Massie admitted to stalking and was ordered to complete a 12-month community order, undergo a 15-day rehabilitation program, and render 60 hours of unpaid work. She was banned from contacting Alvarado for a year and fined a total of around $280. Number 4. Natalie Hannah Persel. 45-year-old Natalie Hannah Persel was accused of photographing another woman in a restroom at a corporate office in Lowell, Arkansas. The incident took place on July 31, 2022, when the victim was using the women's restroom at the J.B. Hunt corporate office. While in the stall, she noticed a cell phone encroaching into her stall. Below the divider to her left, the phone's camera lens was facing her direction, and the individual holding it appeared to push the camera button to take a picture. The woman asked if her photo was being taken, to which the person holding the camera simply replied, "No." The victim recognized the suspect and later brought the incident to the attention of J.B. Hunt Human Resources, which consequently interviewed Persel. During the interview, Persel claimed that she'd gone into the restroom due to a panic attack. She added that her hands had been shaking so bad that she dropped her phone, catching it just before it hit the ground. The victim also contacted authorities and filed a police report, at which point detectives spoke to the company's human resources department. They tried to recreate Persel's version of events, but were unable to replicate her story due to the positioning of the stall and divider. This prompted investigators to seize multiple electronics from Persel's home, including several storage devices, a computer tower containing 2 separate hard drives, and a cell phone. It turned out that Persel had deleted the contents of the devices during the course of the investigation. A search warrant was served on Apple, the maker of Persel's iPhone, and the detectives received a response from the company in April of 2023. The data provided by Apple included some photographs, including one that showed an unidentified person with their pants down sitting on a toilet while they were photographed by someone inside the bathroom. This and other data led detectives to conclude that Persel might have a fetish related to urination or toilets. On May 22nd, Persel was arrested and booked in Benton County on charges of video voyeurism and tampering with physical evidence. Number 3. Tyra Jones. Utah woman Tyra Jones faced charges after she allegedly broke into a Moab home and stared at a sleeping female resident in the early hours of September 15, 2019. When the victim woke up shortly after 2 a.m., she was immediately startled and froze, with Jones standing over her and staring directly at her. She asked the intruder what she was doing there, but she received no response. Consequently, the resident left the room to wake up her son. When she returned with her son, Jones was looking through the closet using her phone's flashlight. Apparently, the son knew Jones and attempted to get her to leave, but she refused, saying she was scared. He dragged Jones out of the house and went to a neighbor for help. As it turned out, the neighbor also knew Jones. Police officers responded to the scene and investigated. They discovered that there was damage to the home's back doorknob. They later found Jones at the home of an acquaintance, whereupon she was promptly taken into custody. She was booked into Grand County Jail with bail later set to the tune of $10,680. According to the Daily Mail, Jones had been involved in several active cases at the time, whereupon she'd shown similar creepy behavior. Today's topic was requested by Johnny Freak 6806. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Lee O'Donnell. In November of 2022, Royal Navy Petty Officer Lee O'Donnell was found guilty of assault after groping a junior sailor's leg and telling her he wanted to bend her over and split her open like a can of beans. The incident occurred when the sailor, who'd been with the Navy for over 20 years, was assigned as an instructor on an aircraft engineering course at HMS Sultan in Gosport. One evening, O'Donnell arranged to meet up with some of his pupils at the Navy base's Gearbox Bar. When he turned up to the bar, he was already intoxicated. Later reports would say that he confessed to drinking 3 bottles of wine at an earlier event. At the bar in question, he continued drinking cider and shots of tequila as he sat around a table with 5 sailors. Moments later, he stared at the female junior sailor's chest and made a comment about her nipples. He took his hand, which had his wedding ring on it, and placed it on her right leg, then moved it up towards her groin The woman immediately slapped his hand away. Nevertheless, O'Donnell put his hand back and began squeezing her leg. He then invited the group to admire how fit the female officer was and made more crude comments about her. O'Donnell even invited her back to his cabin. The unnamed victim got scared, and after the incident, she reported it to the police. She said that the encounter made her start wondering if the Navy was right for her. Authorities interviewed O'Donnell, who claimed that he couldn't remember anything about that night. Following the investigation, O'Donnell left the Navy. After being found guilty, he was sentenced to community service, consisting of 80 hours of unpaid work. He was also ordered to attend 50 days of rehabilitation activity and pay the victim more than $600. Stick around after number 1 if you'd also like to watch our episode about when catfishing goes wrong still. Number 1. Gavin Robinson. After being subjected to a man's terrifying campaign of stalking, 31-year-old English woman Maisie Dickinson said her life turned into a Netflix thriller. The ordeal began in February of 2022, while Dickinson and her husband were snuggled in bed at their Seaham home. They heard loud bangs against a window and ignored it, thinking kids were throwing stones. The next day, Dickinson was curious about the stone throwing and remembered their neighbor had CCTV cameras. She said that when the neighbor showed her the footage, she gasped to see that the one who'd thrown the stones was a man in a dark tracksuit with his hood up. Dickinson decided to put the footage on Facebook and asked if anyone recognized him. Within minutes, the post got dozens of comments identifying the suspect as local man Gavin Robinson. Dickinson didn't initially report the incident and continued her normal life. Months later, she found dozens of messages in her message request folder on Facebook Messenger. The messages were threats from an individual and were dated 3 months back. One of them read, "Do you think you're safe?" Another stated that he'd incapacitate Dickinson from head to toe. In the messages, the person seemingly knew a lot about Dickinson's life, including her routine, where she worked, her husband's name, and even where her children went to school. There were several more threats and missed calls, which were ultimately enough to throw Dickinson into a mental breakdown. Panicked, she wrote back saying she didn't know him. The Facebook user subsequently replied saying that Dickinson had been cheeky to him on social media. Everything came together for Dickinson at that moment, and she realized it was Robinson, the same man from the CCTV footage that she had posted on social media. A couple of days later, she spotted him waiting outside her children's school gates. When the mother got a closer look at his face, she realized he'd previously come to her workplace and stared at her in silence before leaving. From then on, Dickinson began getting calls in the middle of the night, and when she answered, Robinson would breathe heavily down the phone. In other instances, he sent voice notes which said he'd slice her face with a blade. When Dickinson decided to ask her neighbor if she could check his CCTV footage, again, she found shocking footage of Robinson watching her house at night. He also often appeared about 15 minutes after her partner would leave for work, indicating he was very aware of both of their schedules. For unknown reasons, Dickinson still decided not to inform the police, a decision that will leave many people baffled. Everything came to a boil in May of 2023 when he followed her to work while she was with her young daughter. Dickinson rushed to her workplace and asked her colleagues to lock all the doors. Robinson ran up to the store doors and shook them violently while shouting that he was going to kill her. Police were finally called, and when officers arrived, Dickinson told them everything. The officers located Robinson shortly after and arrested him. 3 months later, the 28-year-old pleaded guilty to stalking involving fear of violence and possession of cannabis. He was sentenced to 2.5 years behind bars, and Dickinson got a lifetime restraining order against him. Dickinson later said in an interview that the incident left her and her family traumatized. She added that she didn't really know why she'd been targeted. In April of 2014, Alabama woman Marissa Williams took in her 19-year-old niece, Marissa, but the relationship between the two rapidly became strained. The teen perceived her aunt as controlling, while Patra had grown frustrated by Marissa constantly talking to men online and inviting them to the home she shared with her son and fiancé. In an attempt to monitor the teenager's behavior, Patra created a Facebook profile for Trey Top Dog Ellis and began talking to Marissa. The woman successfully catfished her niece, but by her own admission, the endeavor would reveal much more than she ever could have fathomed. In her talks with Ellis, Marissa claimed that she hated her aunt and, at one point, suggested she and Ellis have intercourse in Patra's bedroom as she slept. After one incendiary row in which the latter hadn't allowed the teenager to go out at unusual hours, Marissa asked Ellis to kill her aunt, unaware that they were the same person. Marissa explained in detail how he could get to her aunt's bedroom and, if Ellis faced resistance, also suggested he kill Patra's fiancé, son, and the family dog. Judging from the precise instructions Marissa had provided and the fact that she'd begun packing her belongings, Patra began fearing for the safety of her family. She called 911 and Marissa was arrested, shocked to learn that her aunt was actually the same person she tried to enlist as a hitman. Marissa was arrested for solicitation to murder but escaped while on probation and has been a fugitive ever since. In May of 2020, Dallas man Deontay Hicks drove from Dallas to Houston to be with a woman he'd been talking to online. On May the 10th, he stood outside his car in the 1000 block of Center Parkway, presumably waiting for his date. It was there that the 27-year-old was gunned down and robbed. His family believed that the incident had been the culmination of a catfishing scheme concocted by the robbers to lure Hicks to the location. Two unidentified African-American suspects were spotted fleeing the scene on foot in an unknown direction of travel. The victim, a father of one, was taken to a local hospital where he succumbed to his injuries. No arrests have been made in connection to his murder, and his family traveled to Houston in the aftermath and began spreading flyers. They hoped to drum up new leads for local law enforcement, whom they felt hadn't done enough towards bringing Hicks's killers to justice. Number 3. Denali Brer. In early June of 2019, an Alaska teen was catfished into killing her friend by a man with whom she developed a relationship online. Denali Brer, aged 18, was offered $9 million to abuse and kill someone and to document the ordeal. She chose Cynthia Hoffman, a developmentally disabled teenager who trusted Brer and regarded her as her best friend. The man with whom the prospective killer had been talking posed as a millionaire named Tyler, but in reality was 21-year-old Darren Schillmiller from Indiana, nearly 4,000 miles away. Leading up to the murder, he'd also allegedly instructed Brer to send him pictures of her assaulting minors. Brer promised 4 accomplices a cut of the money she was expecting to receive from Tyler. The group lured 19-year-old Hoffman to a hiking trail outside of Anchorage, where she was bound and executed via a gunshot to the back of the head. A 16-year-old male had reportedly acted as the triggerman, using a firearm supplied by Brer, who reportedly sent a Snapchat of the killing to the man she believed would pay her for it. Hoffman's body was later discovered on a bank of the Eklutna River. Brer was arrested along with Schillmiller and the other accomplices, with each of them facing life in prison. A sentence hasn't been pronounced as their cases have been delayed in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. Number 2. Charles Lumis. In June of 2018, Missouri man Charles Lumis was catfishing with a friend on Truman Lake. They had a trot line, which is a series of baited hooks on separate lines, and were pulling in catfish, one of which barbed Lumis in the knee. He told his friend that he felt like he'd been poked but didn't think much of it and continued fishing. About a half an hour later, his condition worsened as Lumis couldn't properly move his leg, which he discovered had swollen up to the size of a volleyball. By the following morning, he couldn't walk and began experiencing vivid hallucinations. Even though his movement had been severely impaired, Lumis visualized that he'd been picking tomatoes in his garden and had been running down the road to give some to his neighbor. He then became unresponsive and his wife called an ambulance, which rushed him to the hospital, where he was put in the ICU. Doctors found that Lumis had fluid in his lungs and stress on his heart and organs. They determined that through the catfish sting, he'd contracted Aeromonas, freshwater bacteria that triggered a violent infection. Lumis had been on the verge of death, but after receiving treatment for several weeks, he was on the road to a full recovery. Number 1. Memon David UT. On May the 31st of 2021, a freshman linebacker for Virginia Tech beat a man to death with his bare hands for catfishing him on Tinder. 18-year-old Memon David UT had matched with someone named Angie on the dating platform and went to an address in Blacksburg in April. It was there that he was met by 40-year-old restaurant worker Jerry Smith. The pair became intimate under complete darkness, and with Smith hiding his face, circumstances that reportedly prevented UT from realizing that his date was a biological male. UT returned to the apartment in late May and savagely attacked Smith upon discovering he'd been catfished. The young athlete punched him repeatedly and stomped on his head, breaking his teeth and every bone in his face. UT would later tell investigators that he left the apartment and didn't call the emergency services, even as he heard bubbling and gurgling sounds coming from the victim. The police found Smith's badly beaten body the following day. UT, who confessed to the killing under questioning, was charged with second-degree murder. Thanks for watching. Would you rather have your phone stolen or your wallet with $2,000 cash in it? Let us know in the comments section below.